Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I hope you all are doing absolutely well. So guys, in today's video, we are going to discuss some important React interview questions which are definitely going to help you in your upcoming React interviews. So before starting the video, if you are new to my channel, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done yet, because I regularly post these helpful videos for all of you. Also, I have created a complete React.js interview question playlist. So if you are preparing for your upcoming interviews, make sure to check this playlist because there are a lot of helpful interview questions that I have covered in this series. So let's get back to our today's questions and let's start with the first question for today, which is what is the impact of indexes as keys, okay, in React. So we already know that whenever we use a map on an array in React, we should pass a key. Okay, why we should pass the key? So what if we don't pass a key? Will it give an error or will it not run our code on the UI? So no, it is not like so. If we do not pass a key also, our code will run absolutely fine, but in the console we will get to see a warning or an error message that you have not passed a key to your list. So the first thing is you should always pass a key to your array when you are mapping over your arrays. Second thing is your keys should be unique. Okay, so if you do not have an ID or a unique value, then in that case you can also pass indexes as the key. So we can say something like this, that for example, we have IDs, okay, IDs associated with our array values, then you should definitely use IDs, okay. But if you do not have IDs and you do not have any option, then make sure to use at least indexes, because nothing is better than something, right? So that is why we say index, you should always as a key, but if you do not have a unique value, then you can use indexes. Let's now understand this question, that why it is saying that what is the impact of indexes as keys, because ideally we should not pass indexes as keys too, because it has some drawbacks. So let's understand that in this question. So first of all, keys should be stable, predictable and unique. Okay, this is very important, so that the React can keep track of elements. In the below code snippet, each element's keys will be based on ordering rather than tied to the data that is being represented. This limits the optimization that React can do and create confusing bugs to the application. So the answer for this question mainly lies in this, that this limits the optimization that React can do. Okay, so using indexes as key limits the optimization that React can do in your code. For example, what is the reason behind that? For example, if we have an array, okay, let's consider to-dos array or any array. So for now, like I'm considering that this array has this numerical values. Okay, now if we are passing indexes as keys, then it means what? Then it means that it is passing a key to each element of this array based on its index value. Okay, index value or its order on which it is present right now. For example, later in my code, if this array got updated and the elements of the array got reordered, okay, so now my new array looks something like this. So now the IDs will also now the IDs will also change for every element. For example, this will be the new IDs. So in this case, when your to-dos get reordered or when your arrays got reordered later in the code, then React cannot do the optimization that it can do in your code. Okay, and this is only what is a drawback of indexes, and you might see confusing bugs and you will not understand why your code is behaving in the way it is behaving. Okay, for example, if you are clicking on some button click, instead of removing a particular entry in your to-dos, it is removing some other entry because your IDs are not correct in that case, or your key values are not correct. So in this example, you can see in the first example, we are using key as the index. So that is what I have mentioned. If you do not have any option, then you can use key as the index, but try to assign an ID to your array and then you can use those IDs. So in that case, your IDs will be unique. So now let's read further. If you use element data for unique key, assuming todo.id is unique to this list and stable, React would be able to reorder elements without needing to reevaluate them as much. So if you are passing key as in this way like todo.id, then React does not have to do much reevaluation, because it will automatically understand that yes, this is the particular ID and I have to show the particular data which belongs to this ID. So now I hope you might have understood what is the drawback or impact of using indexes as keys. Let's move on to our next question, which is how do you conditionally render components? Okay, conditional rendering means based on a particular condition, your one component should render, and if the condition is false, your other component should render. Okay, for example, let's take an example. If we have a true or false state, okay, so I want to show that if data is true, then show something. If it is false, then show something. Okay, which means if data is true, then show my h1. Okay, whatever is there in h1, and if it is false, then show a paragraph tag or something. So this is only what is called as conditional rendering. Now let us see how do we actually do conditional rendering in our components. So in some cases you want to render different components depending on some state. JSX does not render false or undefined. So you can use conditional short circuiting to render a given part of your component only if a certain condition is true. So basically, in order to achieve conditional rendering, we can do it in two ways. First is this way, which is like short circuiting, and second is ternary operator way. Okay, so let's see both the ways. So in first way, what we are doing is we are getting two props, okay, name and address, and then we are writing our JSX code where first of all we are showing the name. Now on name we have not put any condition. Name will definitely be printed every time on the screen, but on address we are putting a conditional rendering. For example, here we are checking if address has a value, then only show the address, okay, which is this paragraph tag. If address does not have a value, then do not show anything. Okay, so this is important. This is only called as conditional rendering. Now next important thing is we have to do a else if condition. Okay, for example, in this case we just have taken care of the if condition. If address is not present, then don't show it. What if it is the other case? If address is not present, then we have to show something else. Okay, so in that case we can make use of ternary operator. So in this example you can see in the below one, if address is not if address is present, then show address. Else if address is not present, then show this line which is address is not available. So this is what is called as conditional rendering. So I hope now you have got both the ways, what is short circuiting and what is ternary operator, and how do we do conditional rendering. Next question is, why do we need to be careful when spreading props on DOM? So when we spread props, we run into the risk of adding unknown HTML attributes, which is a bad practice. Instead, we can use prop destructuring with REST operator. So it will add only the required props. So in this, let's take this example and understand it. For example, in this code, we have two components, component A and component B. So component A is our parent component, which is calling component B and passing two props to it. Okay. So we are passing these two props, that is display and class name. Okay. Now in our component B, we are destructuring is display, and remaining we are destructuring using our REST operator, which means this DOM props will have all the remaining attributes. So now on this div, what we are doing is we are using this DOM props. Okay, so when we are using this way, then you know what is happening. We are not using this is display, which means that is display will not be shown. But what is the other case? If I am not writing this is display separately, and if I am directly doing this DOM props, then this is display will also be attached as a prop to this div. Okay, so and it does not make sense, right? Because on DOM it is not doing anything, because on our div, okay, when it is getting displayed on screen, this does not make any sense, right? Is display true? Because this we have added for our JSX code. Okay, so it should be present in our JSX code, but adding directly using this operator and directly adding all the props does not make any sense. And we should always destructure in this way, like whatever is needed, that only should be added. So you know, it keeps your code easy, and if there is any error, you can debug also very easily, and you will not end up in the risk of adding unknown HTML attributes. Let's move on to our next question. How do you memoize a component? Okay, so basically there are two ways in order to memoize a component. So first one is your react.memo, and second one is your UseMemo Hook. Okay, now what is memoizing a component? Let me give you a brief idea about it. So memoizing basically means that if you have a function or a piece of code which is producing some output. Okay, for example, let's consider that we have this function sum. Okay, it is taking some parameter something, and what it is doing is, for example, it is taking a and b, and it is returning the sum of a and b. Okay, now if we have memoized this function, then what will happen is it will always check. Okay, for example, if we have memoized this, then in the first case, if we are getting 1 and 2 as the input to this function, then it is reproducing the output as 3. So it will memoize this always, that when I got input 1 and 2, always the value is going to be 3. So next time, whenever again this function is getting called, it will check whether my inputs are 1 and 2, then it will not do the extra computation or the expensive computation of calculating it all over again. It will just directly take this value that yes, I have already calculated it, and it is already there in my memory, that when I get an input of 1 and 2 on this function, the output is always going to be 3. So that is why memoization is helpful for. So memoization, what it does is it improves the performance of your app so that it does not have to do recalculations for the same inputs. Okay, so this is basically the concept of memoization. Now how can we achieve memoization, that is this concept, in React in a component? Okay, so first one is React.memo method. React provides a built-in higher order component called React.memo that can be used to memoize a functional component. This higher order component wraps around the functional component and returns a memoized version of it. This memoized version of the component will re-render only if its props change. If the props remains the same between renders, React will reuse the previously rendered result, improving performance, right? So what I have explained you in terms of example here, the same thing is explained in terms of a functional component, because we know that functional components at the end of the day are normal JavaScript functions. So what it is saying that you can use React.memo method and you can capture your entire component inside this, for example, this way. Okay, so what we are doing is we are wrapping up our my component inside this React.memo. Now what it will do is it will check initially what is the output of this my component. Okay, and my component might take some props. Now what are props? Props are the inputs, right? In this way, in this case we were taking arguments. So arguments and props are similar. In terms of components, we call them as props. So if my component is taking some props, then it will check if the props have changed or not. If my props were similar to the one that I have received previously, then I don't have to execute my component all over again. Okay, I can give the same result which I have given previously because I have already memoized the output for it. So that is what this answer is saying. Let's read it once more. React provides a built-in higher order component called React.memo, which can be used to memoize a functional component. Now let's come on to this second paragraph, which is the important one. This memoized version of the component will re-render only if its props change. If the props remains the same between renders, React will reuse the previously rendered result, which will improve the performance, right? So now I hope it is very clear what is memoization and how can you achieve memoization in a component in React. Okay, so this was the first way, as I told. Now second way is using the UseMemo hook. Okay, so in React we have a hook that we get which is called as UseMemo hook. So hook for memoizing specific parts of a component. Alternatively, you can use the UseMemo hook with a functional component to memoize specific parts of rendering logic. One more thing to remember is you can only use UseMemo hook on functional components, because in general the concept of hooks are introduced in functional components. This hook takes a function that returns the result to be memoized along with the array of dependencies. If any of the dependencies change, the memoized result will be recomputed. Now there are few important points to note is basically UseMemo is applied over a function, okay, and there is a dependency array that is attached to it. Now this dependency array, what it will contain is, if you want that this function or should be recalculated, okay, this function whatever I have written should be recalculated whenever these dependencies change. Now these dependencies can be anything. For example, these dependencies can be state. Okay, so you have a state which is dependency 1, okay, and initially its value was 1. Later on its value got updated to 2. So then you are forcefully telling this function that you have to re-render it because my dependency 1 is changed. Now you have to update this or rerun this function based on this new value, because the logic that you are writing in this code or in this function might be using dependency 1 as some input or in its calculation. Now moving on to the next question, how do you implement server-side rendering or SSR? So React is already equipped to handle rendering on node servers. A special version of the DOM render is available which follows the same pattern as on the client side. So for example, we can import React DOM server in this way from react-dom/server, and then we can do this thing, that is react dom.server.render to string, and then we can pass our component. This method will output the regular HTML as a string, which can be then placed inside the page body as part of the server response. On the client side, React detects the pre-rendered content and seamlessly picks up where it left off. So this is how you can implement server-side rendering. Now let's move on to our next question. Why should component names start with a capital letter? Again, one of the most common interview question, like you will get this question many times, that is it compulsory that you should always, while creating a component, you should always give the capital name to your component? So let's see the answer for this. If you are rendering your component using JSX, the name of the component has to begin with a capital letter. Otherwise, React will throw an error as unrecognized tag. This convention is because only HTML elements and SVG's tag can be done with a lowercase letter. Okay, so you have to understand this, why this convention is followed, because only HTML elements and SVG's tag can begin with a lowercase letter. Now we have to understand few more things. For example, if we are creating a functional component, then you have to give this name in this way, where your first letter would be a capital letter. You can define function component which name starts with lower letter, but when it's imported, it should have a capital letter. Here lowercase is fine. For example, while defining your component, it is not compulsory that you should always give a capital letter. For example, in this way, if you are defining a function, it is totally fine to start the name of your functional component using smaller case. But when you are importing it into another file, okay, so basically what you do is you define your component, you export it from here. Now you go to your another file where you write this statement, okay, like import my component from this way. So then at this place, it is important to give your whenever you are importing, your component name should have a capital letter, first name as the capital one. Okay, so now let's move on to the next question. Are custom DOM attributes supported in React version 16? So the answer for this question is yes. In the past, React used to ignore unknown DOM attributes. If you write JSX with an attribute that React does not recognize, React would just skip it. For example, let's take a look at the below attribute. For example, in this attribute, we have a div, okay, and now we are giving a JSX attribute that is my custom attribute, and there is some value that is assigned to it. So previously, before React version 16, what used to happen is it would render an empty div to the DOM with React version 15. Okay, so when your component get rendered on the screen, it would just display something like this. Okay, because this is not a valid HTML attribute, right? So while displaying on the DOM, it will not display this attribute. But with React version 16, any unknown attributes will end up in the DOM also. So for example, now if you will write this attribute in your React code, this will end up in displaying on the DOM also. Okay, so that is what the answer for this question is, that this the custom DOM attributes are supported in React version 16. Now moving on to the next one, how to loop inside JSX. So this is very easy question. So you can simply use array.map function with ES6 arrow function syntax. For example, the item array of objects is mapped into an array of components. For example, if we have an array that is items, okay, in this way, now this might be an array of object, okay, which will have some values like ID and then name or something. Okay, so how can you map over it? So you have to write it something like this inside curly braces, because this is a JavaScript code. In JSX you are writing, so items dot map, okay, and then in map, it what you have to write is you have to use your arrow function. So item, what this will do is it will take one by one item of yours, and then you have to write your code whatever you want to write in this way, right? And then finally you can close this bracket. So that is what we have done over here. Items, so items is our array name, and then we are mapping over it. So item is one by one value that we are getting from that array, and then we are rendering our logic, whatever we want to display it on the screen. And then this item.id is what? Item.id is the value that we are getting from the one by one object from the array. So object has id and name, so item.id and item.name. So next important thing to note is, but you can't iterate using for loop. Okay, so we can iterate using map function, okay, in ES6, but we cannot use for loop in this case. Why? Because for loop gives a statement. Okay, this, when we are writing this part, okay, for loop, and then whatever we write inside this curly brackets, these are considered as statements, and whatever we write inside map, these are considered as expressions. So this is because JSX tags transpiled into function calls, and you can't use statements inside expressions. Okay, so that is the main reason behind it. So you have to remember that you cannot use for loop to map over your arrays in JSX, because for loops use statements and you can't use statements in that case. And you can in place of for loop, you can use map and arrow function of ES6. Let's move on to our next question, which is how do you accept props in ports? So React or JSX does not support variable interpolation inside an attribute value. The below representation won't work. For example, if you want to use an attribute inside your JSX, how can you do it? For example, this is my prop. Okay, this is my prop, and I want to use this inside my JSX code. So this way it won't work, because what I'm doing is I'm using these double quotes, which means that anything inside this double quotes will be considered as a string. So this will not work in an expected way. But what you can do is, there are two ways you can display, in which you can display your props value properly. First one is that you can use this curly brackets. Okay, so if you use curly brackets, then you can separately define what is your string. So in this, if you whatever you are writing inside the double quotes will be considered as string, then you can use concatenation. This plus, what it will do is, this will combine. Okay, so this will combine images text, and then whatever this remaining prop is returning. Okay, for example, this props dot image this dot props dot image is returning the folder name, so then it will be something like this. So images, and then your folder name, that is anything, any image name or something. Okay, image1 or something like this. So in this way you can use, or the other way is you can use backticks. So again, backtick has a similar concept. Whatever you write inside backtick will be considered as string. So you can directly write images, because you want this to be considered as a string, and then you want to display props. So for that dynamic value, what you can do is you can use dollar and then curly brackets, and then you can mention your props. Now here in this examples, we have taken this dot props dot image because we have taken the examples from class based components. But if you already know, if you are using functional components, then you do not have to use this dot props. You can directly display your prop name. Let's move on to the next question now, how to conditionally apply class attributes. So you shouldn't use curly brackets inside quotes, because it is going to be evaluated as a string. So the same concept is here also. For example, if you want that based on the prop value, you should apply a class name. So what you can do is, first of all, this you cannot do. Why? Because here everything is captured inside these strings or double quotes. Okay, so whatever that you are writing over here will be displayed as it is, because all of this is considered as what? This is getting considered as a string. So this is the wrong way of doing it. Instead, what you can do, again, those same two ways which we have seen in the previous question. First one is you can use curly braces on the outermost level. Okay, and then whatever you want it as a string, you can mention it here. And then what you can do is, for example, this part you want to mention it as a string, so you can put it in the strings, and then you can concatenate the later part. So what this will do is, this will see what is the props value. If it is true, then show this value. If it is false, then you can show this value. Okay, so this was one way, and the second way is again using backticks. So in backticks, you don't even have to separately mention this BTL panel in a string, because in backticks, whatever you mention by default is considered as a string. Okay, and the later and the other part which you do not want to display as a string, that part you have to cover it inside a dollar and curly braces. Okay, so then this will be evaluated based on its value. For example, this dot props dot visible, if it is true, then show this. If it is false, then show this. Okay, basically we are using ternary condition over here. So in this way we can conditionally apply class attributes. So that's all for this video. I hope you have got few more understanding of major concepts of React with these questions. So that's all for this video. Again, if you are new to the channel, make sure to subscribe to my channel to see more such helpful videos. And if you haven't checked this playlist yet, please make sure to check this too. Thanks for watching the video.